Hey, how's it going? It's been a while since I've done a video because I've been busy working on some projects, and so it's sort of like slipped past me as it were. The weather has turned horrible here. Let me tell you, a couple of days ago there was like a light to medium snowfall. Well, light to medium snowfall for Ukraine, right? This kind of snowfall had fell in like D.C. or New York, everybody would be having a complete meltdown. But it was like no big deal. I don't know, 6 inches or something. And the thing is, see, after that, it started raining. Okay, and so it's the whole place is covered in slush, and you know that at night it freezes over, and it's a nightmare. Like I went to work at a cafe, and I came back to my apartment, and it was just like about a mile away, I suppose. And my feet just got soaked. My fingers, I mean, they hurt. And it's not that cold. I mean, it's not a real Ukrainian winter. It's just like sort of like a taste of it, and not even a full taste of it, right? And so I thought to myself, for the soldiers, this must be a complete nightmare, especially if they don't have the right winter gear. I've been hearing a lot of stories about how Ukrainian soldiers are trying to keep warm in their shelters wherever they are or their trenches, and they'll light a little fire just to warm up their fingers and their feet, and because of it, they're spotted and killed. I mean, this is a disaster. Okay, and a lot of things are coming out that a lot of soldiers are suffering maladies that we all thought had gone the way of World War One. Trench foot, stuff like that. People losing their feet, both of them, because their feet literally rot in the trenches. Because of course, what happens is that the trenches fill up with water, right? And it's ice cold. And on top of that, if you're in a defensive posture for a prolonged period of time, there's no porta potty. You got to just take a dump and take a leak right then and there. And so all this stuff gets into your feet and it freezes up. You get frostbite, you get infection, you lose your limbs. And this is the state of affairs that's going on around the town of Bakhmut. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bakhmut is this, it's sort of like a crossroads of multiple roads and rail lines. And that is where the big battle is taking place. This battle has been going on for the last couple of months. And the Russians are doing what they've been doing from the beginning, which is just hitting it with artillery every goddamn day, just slowly chewing it up. And what's going on in Bakhmut, the tragedy that's going on, is that Bakhmut is this small town, but it's been incredibly fortified by the Zelensky regime forces at NATO's direction. Because NATO is running this war, don't kid yourself. And they are applying NATO tactics to this war. Now, the problem is that NATO tactics are effective against insurgents in some Middle Eastern country, but they're a catastrophe insofar as this kind of large-scale industrial warfare is concerned. And so they are literally feeding in all of their troops into Bakhmut to protect this fortress. They're falling for the sunk cost fallacy. If you don't know what that is, look it up. They are feeding more and more troops, and the Russians are just steadily grinding away, minimizing their own losses as they annihilate not just Zelensky regime forces, not merely territorial defense forces, which are ill-equipped for this kind of warfare, but also all the NATO military contractors. Because finally, in Newsweek, there was an article that revealed, almost like an aside, that yes, indeed, all those sophisticated HIMARS weapons and M777s and all the rest of it, they are being operated by contractors, Western contractors, i.e. NATO troops, that, of course, which I suspected from months ago, they were resigning their commission with their NATO army, be it the United States or Poland or Romania, and immediately signing a contract with a private military contractor and going to Ukraine using Ukrainian uniforms. I mean, I suspected, because once it was explained to me, once I understood that all these sophisticated weapons take months to learn to operate properly, I thought to myself, well, obviously, The Zelensky regime doesn't have months to train its men to use these weapons. These weapons must be operated by Westerners, Westerners who have had the proper training, Westerners who therefore are elements of the NATO armies. And that's proven to be the case. And now it's getting to a point, the number of NATO casualties is rising so much that they're no longer able to hide it. Poland was the first to cry uncle and start to reveal how many men that they have lost. And those numbers are growing. And NATO, commanding the Zelensky regime forces, is just feeding the Russians all of their remaining troops. On the other hand, what's going on is that the Russians have assembled a force that has been estimated credibly at between 540,000 and 600,000 troops, and they're not done yet. Over 500,000 troops and loaded for bear, forgive the pun, with all kinds of rockets and artillery and all the gasoline that they could ever want for all of their vehicles, not to mention all kinds of vehicles, right? Tanks, armored personnel carriers, the works, the whole smash. The Russians seem to be gearing up. Many people think that it's going to be big arrow offensives, something coming out of Belarus, from the north of Ukraine, north of western Ukraine, which would slice off and interrupt the flow between Kiev and the west, and another big arrow coming out of Donetsk, the Donbass region, and perhaps a third arrow coming out of Belgorod, the Kharkov area. Now, all of that could be taking place, who knows? I actually thought initially that that might be the case, but now, the way things are going, it seems to me that what's really happening, and this is my supposition, what seems to really be happening is that because NATO is actually doing what the Russians want, which is feeding them troops to be annihilated at Bakhmut and in the eastern and southern front generally, that the Russians are going to keep on grinding away until they completely eviscerate the Zelensky regime forces and all the NATO contractors. And once they've totally annihilated all these forces and drawn up all the reserves and just sucked them all in and just spit them out, destroyed, of course, I think that this enormous army that the Russians have, it's the occupation army. And that's what it is. And yeah, they have all this combat gear and all the rest of it, but more like a, kind of like a just-in-case kind of scenario. I think that this big force, they're going to hold it back, keep on growing it, as they keep on grinding away in this war that seems so static. But you see, it's not the territory. I mean, I'm always insisting on this. It's not the territory. It's the army. You're not fighting territory, you are fighting an army. And if you destroy the army, eventually you'll be able to take over the whole territory. And that seems to be the Russians' approach. Surovikin, the commanding general of all Russian forces in the theater of operations, he said very clearly that his whole intent was a slow attritional war to demilitarize, quote unquote, Ukraine. What do you think demilitarization, what do you think that means? It means destroying the entire military. And NATO and the Zelensky regime are doing this. And Bakhmut is the focus because they've invested so much in defending Bakhmut that they can't pull back. They keep it like a bad gambler, Bad gambler, he bets on red, he loses. So what's he do? He doubles down, puts, instead of 2 chips, he puts 4 chips on red, loses again. So what's he do? He puts 8 chips, loses again, puts 16, and then 32, and then 64, and then he's bankrupt. See? That's what the Zelensky regime is doing insofar as Bakhmut is concerned. And it's just playing right into the Russians. It's right into the Russians' hand. And it's just a catastrophe. It's just so sad. It's such a tragedy. It just breaks your heart because you see, when you see people who are brave and fighting hard, you admire them, whatsoever their stripes. It's just a natural human reaction, or perhaps it's really something that only men feel. I don't know, because women don't seem to feel the same way. But I've noticed most guys, even when they have like an opponent who perhaps even beats them, they're like, yeah, that guy was, yeah, I don't like him. He's an SOB and all the rest of it. But yeah, he's got balls. He's tough, you know? And so to see men throwing their lives away for nothing, that's the tragedy. For nothing or worse, for some PR headline. Anyway, that's been my mood insofar as the last few days. And maybe that's why I haven't been doing videos, because I see what's coming. It's just a tragedy. Nothing is changing. The Zelensky regime, the definition of insanity. They keep doing the same goddamn thing over and over and over again, thinking that they'll get a different result. And the worst part, see, the kind of war that they're fighting, we're just feeding men into these pointless defenses. It just plays into the Russians. And see, in attritional warfare, I mean, the first thing you have to do is just make two columns. Their forces and your forces. And if it's an attritional contest, you got to add them up and say, who's got more? Because in attritional war, the guy who's got more, he's going to win. The Russians have over 500,000 troops. The Zelensky regime does not have anything even remotely close. So they're going to lose. And all the loss of life will be pointless. And of course, none of the people in NATO, none of the people in Kiev want to negotiate. There is no other option except negotiation. But of course, on top of that, they have been so duplicitous over the years. And, Angela Merkel herself just said in 2 separate interviews, she admitted openly that she had basically crooked Vladimir Putin, that the Minsk II agreements were just a way to buy time, and that the Germans had no intention of ever forcing the Zelensky regime or the Poroshenko regime before it to implement the Minsk II agreements. So the Russians don't believe anything that the West says. And even if the West came begging to negotiate, the Russians would say, we don't believe you, We just don't, Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We're not going to get fooled twice. Minsk II, you fooled us. Not going to let it happen again. The Russians, they still call this a special military operation, but it's not merely a war. From the Russian point of view, there is only one outcome: unconditional surrender. That's the only outcome. And all of the Zelensky regime forces, all of these very, very brave men, they're all going to die for nothing. And so, I guess what happens is that whenever I think about this reality, because that is the reality on the ground, I think of this and I'm just too saddened to make a video. And I made a video really just because so many of you followers have been always so very, very kind to me. And I always thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, truly. So many of you are concerned for my well-being here in Kharkov, and I so appreciate it. You have no idea how moving it is. And so I really did this video to tell you that I'm fine, I'm still doing my Patreon stuff. I did a live stream a couple of days ago with Brian Berletic and Alex Christoforou. That was great. And it looks like we're going to be on their show, on the Duran show next week, Brian and myself. I'm fine, and thank God there's still electricity and therefore there's still heating here. That's not the case with the vast majority of the rest of Ukraine. I have no idea why I'm fortunate in this regard, but, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. But anyway, I just want to make this video to thank you all, say that I'm okay. And it just breaks my heart. I mean, it truly does. I mean, see, you can laugh about foolish decisions of people more powerful than yourself and say, look how stupid they are and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's all good and fine. But when you start seeing the bodies pile up, when you start seeing the casualties, it just, you want to rip your eyes out. You want to tear your hair out. You want to scream. I don't know what you want to do, man. I mean, that's the emotion I feel when I see all of these men, no longer young, because many of the young ones are dead already, and they're eating up guys who are almost my age, 54, almost my age. And you see them being just annihilated. You see them losing limbs because of trench rot. You see them just, cowering, over a little can with a little fire going. And, some can that probably had like beans or something, and they have a little fire going, and they're trying to keep themselves warm in this cold, in this grim a winter that's coming, and it just breaks your heart. And so I guess that's why I haven't been doing videos, because it just breaks your heart. Take it easy.